We begin this service by acknowledging that this land is the traditional territory of the Piscataway and Pamunkey peoples. Their presence is imbued in these forests, valleys, waterways, and shorelines. The trees watched over them as they watch over us. May we nurture our relationship with their descendants, work to decolonize ourselves and our way of being, and live into our shared responsibilities to this land and its creatures, where we mutually abide and worship.
Good morning, and welcome to UUCA. My name is Thornell Jones, and I'm your worship leader today. We celebrate the inherent worth and dignity of every person by inviting people to bring their full selves, their ethnic heritage, their sexual orientation and relationships, their gender identity, and all their lived experiences to our community. At UUCA, we value and aspire to be the home for people of varying faith beliefs and of atheists and free thinkers, that we're united by our covenant and by our belief that diversity is richer than uniformity. I offer a special welcome to visitors and people who have not been to UUCA in a long time. I'm asking you to identify yourself in the chat so that we can welcome you more fully. Indigenous people occupied this land for over 30,000 years. It only took a few hundred years to completely change the population. Now we are recognizing that the indigenous people had sacred rituals that respect the earth and kept it livable. We need to listen to today's lesson to help us regain our understanding of what it means to be a citizen of this land, each helping to maintain a livable earth. Let's all join in reciting our covenant. Love is the spirit of our people, and service is our call. To build the beloved community, to seek fuller truths in love, to dwell together in peace, to offer aid and affirmation, and to live for one another. This is our covenant.
My name's Aliana.
You have to say it louder.
Aliana.
Aliana. With a beautiful name like that, don't hide it.
And you know,
I'm Thornell. Okay? And we're going to go light the chalice. This is what we like to challenge. And you come over here and you pick it up. And you push that button up and down, and you'll see the wick come up and down. Watch the wick. Okay? Okay, so when it's out like that, you can light the candle. You can go over and light the wick. And you can light the chalice. Great job. Now you can put the wick out by pulling it back in. That's great. Now put it back down here. Great, Aliana. Thank you so much. Aliana lit the chalice this morning to prepare us for today's lessons around this spiritual theme in our daily lives.
Good morning. I'm Julie. I serve the children, youth, and families here at our church. And now it's time for our Wonder Box. So I'm going to get our Wonder Box and see what's inside. Ah, it's a cube. Let me put this box down and we can wonder about it together. This cube is a cube that we put in last month's faith formation kit for all of our families to take home. And it reminds me of practicing yoga last week here at the church, last Sunday in the evening with other families. I remember Jesse Rhines, who was the yoga instructor, asking us to take a moment to feel the earth beneath us support us. Once she asked us to feel this support when we were standing, another time when we were laying down, to feel the earth rise up and support our body so we could fully rest. It made me think this week of how important it is for everyone among us to feel supported. I thought back to a time when I was living in Argentina and I traveled on this ferry and it was packed with people, teens, elders, families, young adults, and there were two children running around the boat, maybe 6 or 7 years old. And as they ran around, not only did people not seem to be annoyed or bothered by their energy and their movement, but they seemed to love it, to welcome it. And as these children would pass people by, sometimes they would get a kiss on the head or a pat on the back or their shoulder touched so affectionately. And I remember thinking then, when I was on that boat, all alone, as a young adult, feeling a little bit uncomfortable out of my own country and comfort zone, just loving that culture and thinking then that if I were to ever begin a family later in life, I would want to raise my family in a place like that, in a place where it seemed like the children belonged to everyone And where as people got off the boat, if someone needed extra time standing up or walking, people would wait or help them, support them. And I think now as a mother living in Annapolis, how I've been at a playground sometimes, maybe talking to another mom friend, seeing my child across the way possibly slip or fall off of a swing, and wishing so much that the other people around my child would immediately help them and respond to support them. During this time of COVID, when a lot of injustice and support systems are exposed or taken away, it just reminds me that if some of us, among our community, are not feeling well supported, it affects the entire community. I wonder how we can offer support to one another and how we can ask for support when we need it.
In the early morning of December 3rd, 2016, I headed towards Oseti Shikoin, a particular camp more generally known as Standing Rock. As I arrived at the camp, I was greeted along the side of the road by banners and flags. As you turn into the camp, you literally drive down between the avenue of flags. Most of these flags had been brought by a delegation of other First Nation people, presented in ceremony to the elders at the sacred fire, and then hung in solidarity. Right before you passed through the security checkpoint, which made sure that you were there with a peaceful spirit, that made sure that you carried no weapons or brought in any drugs or alcohol. Right before there was a flag alongside the road that read, "Love beyond belief." All Souls Unitarian Church of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was great to know that our people preceded me into the camp. Also among the flags were many that pictured a black snake, sometimes stopped, sometimes cut in half. The black snake that was part of an ancient prophecy of an evil that would need to be resisted to come in the future. A black snake understood to be the Dakota Access Pipeline. Now, if you arrived at camp, you would have to get a sense of the terrain, in part because the camp changed day by day. As people arrived, lived, contributed, struck their tent and their belongings, packed up and left. So it was always an organic community changing. But to your left were the healing and medical tents, the Reiki tent, the midwifery tent, the embodied healing tents, the emotional healing and wellness tents, and eventually the chaplain tent that I would help erect in the coming days. To the right of the avenue of flags was the sacred fire, where people would join in prayer and ceremony, make announcements to keep people up to date about what was happening and transpiring, and sing songs of their people taught to them by their ancestors. Just beyond there was this large geodome perhaps I think the biggest structure in the whole place, visible mostly around any turn. And it was there that morning meeting was held. When you arrived, you went to morning meeting. And when I arrived, you had to sort of sidestep your way in. There were so many hundreds of us who had answered the call to come. If it was your first morning in camp, you were asked to leave shortly after morning meeting began to go to orientation. And so most of us left that morning. And it was there and at morning meeting that they used a particular phrase. They said, when you come here, you are so welcome. And when you come here, you need to set aside your colonial mindset. You need to set it aside. Now, this was really interesting. This really struck me. I had never before heard that I had a colonial mindset. Never before heard that my spirit had been colonized. And yet, this didn't seem untrue. It seemed to be something that I recognized, something, a new understanding for me. And yet, I also didn't entirely know what it meant. And so I learned. It also, incidentally, that moment was the seed for this service today and for our theme, Decolonizing Our Faith this month. So let us learn together what that might mean. Here is what I learned that day and in the 4 days that I was at Standing Rock. You learned it was better to be a quiet, attentive leader rather than speak right away. Always something hard for a New Yorker. You learned that the Native leaders had well thought out strategies, and your bright idea might not understand the whole picture. You were told that this coming into community was not meant to be an experience for you. You didn't come into this community to learn from it or appreciate it, though I know I did. You didn't come as a voyeur, and you didn't come to bring your Western culture into this space, singing camp songs on your guitar by the sacred fire, though some tried and were invited to stop. You learned that it was important not to be a burden, to come there bringing resources into the community and not to pull resources out of the community to the extent that it would jeopardize the well-being of all. And you heard over and over again the dangers, the necessity of abandoning Western colonial notions of individualism and self-reliance. This was probably clearest when they talked about how there was a truly significant blizzard coming, about 14 to 26 inches of snow that would be dropped on my last day there. They said, sisters and brothers, too many of us arrived over the summer or the early fall and are still in these pup tents. So many of us don't understand North Dakota and what winter means here. Go around. Look after one another. Sisters and brothers, invite each other into the warmth. No one should be alone in inadequate shelter. Invite them into the warmth. They could sleep into the geodome. They could sleep in one of the healing tents. They can find shelter that is being built at that moment. They could sleep in the interfaith yurt built by the Unitarian Universalists. There are places to come in, sisters and brothers. Rely on one another. And one way you learned to be relied on was to go and volunteer, not just for one shift a day, but throughout the day. You could go to the volunteer tent and ask what needed to be done, or you can move throughout the tent, move throughout the camp, volunteering as you go. Do you need a hand? Is there something I could do? Is there anything I can locate for you? Can I be of help? You could help make sure that the compost stayed in the compost bin, or the recycling stayed in the recycling bin, or that the solar heaters or electricity, that those connections were working right. Or you could work on a construction crew that started in the dawn light, or started in the early morning and built into the darkness to make sure that there were lean-tos to help protect people from the storm, or to help weatherize tents. You could cook food that was offered freely to each and every one of us. And part of this great participation was connected to another message. And that message is that you are guest. Even those leading morning meeting and leading orientation, even they are guest. The First Nation peoples that traveled from Oregon and New Mexico and Hawaii, all of them are guests. Everyone who is not Lakota, Nakota, or Dakota, those folks were on their ancestral lands, and everyone else was guest. And you were welcomed. And as you were welcomed, you assumed the honor of guest with dignity. And so part of a decolonized community were values where you assumed a posture of humility, of mattering, of significance, and of being guest. It is a beautiful thing. As we enter more deeply into our service this morning, and as we go through this month, I invite you to think about how can we, especially when we are at UUCA, either in person or virtually, how can we walk on this land and be with one another in ways that manifest the importance and dignity of being guest? How can we do our work of decolonizing our faith, of inviting each other in and welcoming each other to a community based on respect, contribution, and mutual reliance? As you move through these changing times, be easy on yourself and easy on one another. You are at the beginning of something new. You're learning a new way of being. You will find that you are working less in the yang modes than you are used to. You will stop working so hard at getting from point A to point B the way that you have in the past. But instead, we'll spend more time experiencing yourself in the whole and your place in it. Instead of traveling to a goal out there, you will voyage deeper into yourself. Your mother's grandmother knew how to do this. Your ancestors from long ago knew how to do this. They knew the power of the feminine principle. And because you carry their DNA in your body, this wisdom and this way of being is within you. Call on it. Call it up. Invite your ancestors in. As the yang-based habits and the decaying institutions on our planet begin to crumble, look up. A breeze is stirring. Feel the sun on your wings. It was at Standing Rock that I learned that decolonized communities are imbued with spiritual life. Every morning at Oseti Shekoin, the elders led the ceremonial procession down to the river, there to honor water. Mini Wakoni, water is life. They would chant, pray, do rituals of gratitude and blessing for 3 hours, from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., to ground and inform their day. It was only after they processed back that they would have breakfast, start morning meeting, gather around the sacred fire. The spiritual practices were how they transmitted wisdom. Mini Wakoni, water is life. It was the prayer life that added weight, evidence, substance to what they were trying to achieve concretely. They said, if we build this Dakota Access Pipeline, it will leak. They do. And when it leaks into our water and kills the fish and disrupts the ecosystem, it is then that we will learn that you cannot drink oil. You cannot eat tar. So we come here to say the wisdom of our ancestors. Mini Wakoni, water is life. Lisa Graybeard, who was the informal chief medic of the camp, said, if anything comes of this whole experience and time, I hope it is that you leave here knowing that the earth is our mother, our grandmother, and she has always provided everything we need to survive. And now it is time to protect her. Mini Wakoni, water is life. Isn't that true? Hasn't pretty much all life on this earth come from water? It seemed that this was the sort of truth that I should build my life around, that we should center, not the kind of truths that I was taught growing up, such as money equals power. So I invite us to think about how our land speaks to us, how this mother speaks to us. In North Dakota, when I arrived, I noticed that the land demanded my attention. The voice of North Dakota was a deep voice, a resonant voice, an immense voice, a voice of wisdom that was always reaching out for me to hear. I find the voice of the land here around us in Annapolis is a different voice. It is soft, inviting. It moves past the ear on the wind. It is kind and light, invitational and knowing. So what prayers or rituals can we do each day to center our attentiveness on this earth that we move on, the air that fills us, the water that sustains us? How can we too have a spiritual life that prompts us to become the protectors of the air and water and land that sustains us? What earth-based wisdom will we pass on from generation to generation?
Now is the time in our service when we share the wealth. This month, we are sharing our wealth with Anne Arundel Conflict Resolution Center. It's a very good resource. Last week, we had a wonderful discussion, explanation of the things that they do, and it's a multitude of ways they can help. So please give generously, and you can do that in one of several ways. You can use the QR codes on the right on this screen, or you can write a check and send it to the church, or you can actually use Church Life to give. Very easy, simple, straightforward way to do this. Thank you for being generous.
By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we wept, when we remembered Zion, by the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we wept, when we remembered Zion, carry us away, captivity required of us a song. How can we sing King Alpha's song in a strange land? The wicked carried us away, required of us a song. How can we sing King Alpha's song in a strange by the rivers of Babylon? There we sat down, and there we wept, when we remembered Zion, by the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we wept, when we remembered Zion, carry us away, captivity required of us a song. How can we sing King Alpha's song in a strange land? Where the wicked carried us away, required of us a song. How can we sing King Alpha's song in a strange land? So let the words from our mouth and the meditation from our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O for us. Let the words and meditations of our mouths and hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O for us.
The spirituality, the peacefulness, the devotion to prayer imbued itself in all parts of life at Standing Rock, including in how the people treated each other. To use the words of the covenant we recited earlier, what I saw at Oseti Shikoan was that they dwelled together in peace and that they lived for one another. The call to love and protect the earth that is their grandmother led them to respect and honor one another. This was both explicit and also imbued in everything. Let's take something just super practical. Every single one of us at some point in the day and multiple times a day would line up in one of those little porta potty areas. And as we did and waited in the cold, young Native men would say to me, sister, you go first. At mealtime, we would gather around for the tasty meals that were prepared for us. And before anyone was served, the voices would ring out, elders, where are you? Please raise your hand, elders. And when you did, you were guided to one of the few seats at a table inside near the warm fires. Trays heaping with food would be brought to you, placed before you with respect. After the elders, the women were served, then the veterans. And the men waited oh so patiently, often out in the cold dark for their turn to be served. Each generation had their role. The elders were the wisdom speakers. They were the ones who led and trained us in the rituals and the songs and the chants. They were the ones who spoke to us the prophecies and the history. Those of us who are sort of in the prime working age of our lives, they were the camp leaders. They were the ones directing actions, things to be happening in the camp, to make decisions, to manage procurement, to structure morning meeting, to arrange acts of reconciliation and conflict resolution. The teens, and we'll hear about this more later, they are the prophetic leaders. And the children, there were not that many children at Oceti Sakowin because the conditions were so harsh in December. But every child was adored. And in this way, every generation had a place of honor and a place of purpose. So I learned that decolonized communities are truly intergenerational and multi-generational. But it went even further. The level of prayer led them to be so loving to one another. One day when I was there, I went to a training on nonviolent direct action. And we were told that any nonviolent direct action to somehow stand in prayer in front of the militarized line of employees that were working to build the Dakota Access Pipeline, any action that we would take would not be a protest, not be a demonstration, not be an act of confrontation, but rather to be a participant. It was an opportunity to participate in ceremony. And you could only do that if you had a peaceful and prayerful heart. They said, "Thank you for coming. And if you cannot do this with a peaceful and prayerful heart, please go and sit and talk with one of our elders. They would love to talk to you." And at this training, there was beginning to be some concern because so many thousands of veterans had come in, so many hundreds of clergy of different faith, and people, the camp leaders and elders and youth were concerned that not everyone came there with a peaceful and prayerful heart. And so it was there that a matriarch came and spoke to us. And she said, "We are here in peace and prayer. There will be no direct action today." Because we would need to know that if you went to the bridge and tear gas fell upon you, or a flash grenade went off, or they grabbed you and pulled you to the other side, that you would respond in peace and prayer. There's more to learn. But even as she was saying we would not do this, she continued and she said, "When I was young, I went to my first sun dance, and I danced this dance, and I felt an elder. I saw an elder I knew, and I ran up to her and said, 'Did you like it?'" Meaning her dance. And the elder woman looked at her with these profound eyes, and this matriarch, then a young woman, felt that her question was inadequate, so almost flip it. And this elder looked at her and she said, "You have to understand, seeing you do this dance was a dream of mine, a dream that I would see our young people do the dances of our ancestors." And then this matriarch looked at the 300 or so of us who had come there to embody being water protectors. And she said, "You are my dream. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making my dream true." This was how they blessed one another. And so, my dear ones, how can we embrace that same gentleness of spirit? How can we embody and give and receive these blessings that make so much possible? How can we share leadership with one another?
For each other's born, our morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each other's born, our morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are grandparents' prayers, and we are our ancestors' dreamings. We are the breath of the universe. We are the spirit of love. We are shepherds of courage and stewards of God. We are beings of dust and the ones of great visions. We're siblings of mercy and kinfolk of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and of wisdom.
All that you learned about today may never have happened at all if it wasn't for a particular seventh generation, the seventh generation of youth that you're looking at. These youth and young adult form the International Indigenous Youth Council. Before Standing Rock created, they recognized the threat of the Dakota Access Pipeline. They recognized that their sacred burial grounds were being violated. And so they did two things. One, some of them literally ran from North Dakota and Omaha to DC to be in front of the White House, making their presence, their needs, and their rights heard. And then one day, 5 of them gathered by a river right near where the Dakota Access Pipeline was meant to cross that sacred river. A river that they knew contained water that is life. And there 5 of them met to hold a council together. A council and a meeting that became Standing Rock. As elders followed youth, as tribes answered the call to support them, and as people journeyed across the country and across the world to be with them, to name that water is life and that sovereign land is meant to be respected. All of this may never have happened had adults not followed the leadership of youth. We too should follow our youth leaders. You are about to hear from one of our youth, Layla Pabon Bryant, and hear some of the things that she knows as sacred. May we listen for more calls of our youth in the days and weeks, months, and years ahead, for they might lead us towards a sacred purpose.
Hi, my name is Layla, and I'm a part of the youth group. I'm in 9th grade, and when I was asked what is important to me, I immediately thought of equality when it comes to race and sexual orientation. I know a lot of people put signs up that say Black Lives Matter or that state that they support the LGBTQ community, but what really are those signs doing? They aren't really changing the world and changing what people have to say about these subjects, and they aren't really helping our community with that. So I think that it's important to know that this is happening and that it is an important subject to know.